Hello you guys and welcome back to my channel. Today we are gonna try and hop right into it because I have a lot of information to go over. It's a really cool video, really interesting. It's not just spooky but also kind of psychological, so we're really gonna hop right into it. But if you guys like this kind of stuff, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. Our little family is growing, and I would love to hear down below your thoughts on the topic. And if you knowingly and repeatedly experience this phenomenon, we all experience it. I'll get into it, but I definitely want to hear your thoughts. But I'm going to hop right into it. Today we are talking about the uncanny valley phenomenon. Now, you might be asking, Becca, why is this on your channel? You're a spooky channel, lifestyle channel, whatever. It's on here because I am a spooky channel. So the uncanny valley, while it is a psychological phenomenon, it does tie into the spooky side of things, and some people make it sound really scary. It is a little bit eerie, especially the feeling you get. If you knowingly have experienced it, you know the feeling I'm talking about. But it ultimately stems down to, in spooky stuff, we talk a lot about cryptids, ghosts, stuff like that, and humanoid figures, and that's really going to play heavily into the uncanny valley. And the uncanny valley really contributes a lot to what people feel when they see or hear or see photos of these creatures. So it's really interesting, and it'll make sense. It'll all tie together. Okay, so what exactly is it? I'm going to read you guys the actual definition. I have my notes right here. It was, I guess, hypothesized by a scientist, Masahiro Mori. And to my understanding, Mori is primarily in robotics and engineering, and that's why they got into this, because of robots, human-like robots. But actual definition: in aesthetics, the uncanny valley is a hypothesized relation between an object's degree of resemblance to a human being and emotional response to the object. So, in simplest terms, something human-like that gives you, like, serious ick. Like, you know that feeling that, like, ugh, like, that makes me uncomfortable, it makes my skin crawl, just for some reason, just makes me really uncomfortable. That's that response that they're talking about. The valley, and what the reason I talk about it, or why it's called the valley, is because of the diagram. I will put it up here. They tried to put it on a diagram to kind of show the resemblance, and that dip down that you guys are seeing is what they're calling the valley. So that really close to human-like is what goes into that valley, and there are varying degrees of that as well. So that's why it's called the uncanny valley. But the valley generally makes people feel varying levels of uncomfortableness, or they experience an eerie feeling, and it's either eerie or uncomfortable or just the heebie-jeebies, you know? So with current technology, and the reason I say current technology is because of your great-grandparents, people who weren't around in today's current digital era with CGI and FX and stuff, may not have experienced it to the extent that we do, because we have such a different relationship with special effects that we're seeing. You probably have experienced it. If you watch any sort of movies or on the internet, you've probably experienced it before to some degree. Certain CGI, like the Polar Express, gives a lot of people that feeling. Personally, I love the Polar Express. I love the book. I read it every year as a kid. I cannot watch it because of how, like, the character, the CGI, is it CGI? The way the characters look, the way that makes me feel. Robots as well. So a lot of people will look at androids or robots that look human-like, and then they experience that feeling. Or if you watch a movie like AI, Artificial Intelligence, which I watched as a child, I don't know why my parents let me watch that. I watched it with them, and looking back, before I knew about this phenomenon, I couldn't figure out why I was so scared of that movie. But now it all makes sense. It all makes perfect sense why that movie really, like, shook me to my core. Also, prosthetics. So a lot of people feel a certain way when they look at prosthetics, and they don't mean to feel that way, and they're not judging the person with the prosthetic, but the resemblance to human limbs gives people that feeling, and that is something within the uncanny valley as well. And something really interesting that Mori hypothesized is that to a certain point of human resemblance, we feel positive connections and empathy with said human-like being. And then there's this line that once you cross it, it elicits this really negative reaction from people. And that's something that scientists, so developers, engineers, artists need to keep in mind when they're creating human-like beings, because once you cross that line, it elicits a different reaction. And some people want that reaction, especially in art. It's supposed to make you feel something, but there is that line that once you cross it, humans naturally have a different reaction. And it's very fascinating. The brain, crazy. I don't get it. So why? What cognitive response are we having that is making us collectively feel this? And there are obviously a lot of theories, and they're kind of all over the place. And I think the ones I present, I think are pretty reasonable, but I want to preface it with, you're all beautiful. Some of these theories are specifically keep in mind that we are animals and we have a biological need to reproduce and keep the strongest and best genes going forward. And there are some things that have physical, I guess, displays in our body. I don't know what the correct word would be, but that are not technically ideal in a animal biological sense of reproduction. But you're all beautiful and amazing, and these are all just theories, and this has nothing to do with you. A lot of them speak for themselves, but these are just kind of a few of them, and I'll go into detail about each and every one of them, but there's a lot. You can really go down a rabbit hole on them. So the first one, and again, of course, I'm going to be reading from my notes. I'm really sorry I'm not making a ton of eye contact with you guys, is pathogen deformity avoidance. So basically, like I said, you're avoiding what we biologically feel are non-beneficial deformities. There are certain pathogens or diseases that have physical traits that we see, and we need to somehow develop a response to not want to try and reproduce that. So that is a natural phenomenon that happens. It basically comes down to us being animals and a biological need to survive, and survival of the fit. That concept is that main one. The second one is violation of human norms. And it goes back to that line that can't be crossed when it comes to enough human, too much human. Some human traits elicit empathy. Too many create unease and judgment. So basically, and again, these are my notes. So basically, there are certain traits that we might see in a doll or in cartoons that we have some sort of response to, and we connect to, and we create a positive response to it. But then once it becomes too human-like, we start to have a negative response, whether it be eerie, uncomfortable, judgmental. We start to have that response, and it becomes this thing that is very human-like is either bad at its job, awkward, moves weird, makes me uncomfortable. You create this really judgmental space, and you don't mean to, is a natural response that you're having. The next one is mortality salience. I don't know how to properly pronounce that, or inevitable death. So this theory really focuses in on the robotic side of things. So when you're looking at robots, or we're watching AI, artificial intelligence, or you're watching these like really robot heavy movies and such, and you're seeing disassembled robots or pieces of them, their faces removed. There's certain there's a movie, I can't remember what it is, that they just fully remove the face to work on it. And this also includes prosthetics. So when people remove their prosthetics, or when you see a prosthetic on a table getting worked on, this causes a fear of death and a fear that you are replaceable. And some even say that it's a DNA trauma response reminiscent of times in the battlefield. So way back in the day, war has always been a thing. So reminiscent of battlefield, the aftermath, seeing body parts, seeing dead bodies, that it's a trauma response, that us seeing pieces of these robots or these unnormal looking things is kind of like just a trauma response. And also, and I think this one it makes a lot of sense to me. It's just our natural aversion to death. We have to remember and approach this kind of logically, that since the beginning of time, we've had to deal with death. We've had to deal with bodies, corpses, whatever you want to call them. We've had to deal with them. We've had to deal with people dying. And we had to learn really quickly that bodies can bring disease. That having them just out can create a major problem for you and your community. So we naturally just created this response that either it was something that naturally happened with us or it was a learned behavior. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not a scientist. That we had to do something about that body. And there are certain characteristics when you die that make you look human, but just enough off that there's something not right. Either you're bloating, your eyes milk over, you stiffen up, you decompose, so that there's something that's just not right about you once you die. And that naturally creates some unease in people. And they kind of link that back to seeing these robots, seeing these characters that look a little too human, that it's us kind of connecting it to death. And that one makes a lot of sense to me. And I definitely recommend researching epigenetics. They have some really, really interesting studies about trauma being etched into your DNA. So not your parents, but maybe your grandparents, your great-grandparents. They did a study on the descendants of Holocaust survivors and the trauma that they are currently experiencing because their ancestors went through the Holocaust. So it's really, really interesting. I definitely recommend researching it a little bit. There's really quick, easy blurbs about it that really tie into this, and it makes perfect sense if you have an understanding of that as well. So this one's kind of hard to explain in my opinion. It's called Religious Definition of Human Identity. I kind of labeled it the special complex. It's basically the concept of human-like entities is considered a threat to the specialness of the human identity. Humans think we're special. So the idea of something very like us, but without a soul, is terrifying. So think about just about anything in any sort of religion that is human-like without a soul is talked very poorly about. So this is why some religions talk about human passing soulless creatures causing chaos or being evil. A lot of examples I saw people talking about were either demons or golems, stuff like that, that resemble humans but are technically soulless. So that kind of leads us into the final theory, which is, in my opinion, the more spooky theory. There are a lot more scientific ones. I definitely recommend reading more on it if you're really interested. There's so many articles about it. And I found an article that lists every single one, and gives a blurb about them. But in my opinion, these are the bigger ones and the ones that make the most sense to me. So the last one, and again, this is kind of the spooky one, is our ancestors created a defense response from another creature. So this, again, ties into the spooky, ties into the cryptids, but basically same concept of the trauma response where etched into our DNA, and it isn't an altering of the DNA, I want to make that clear. It's more like a little etching into the DNA. It doesn't change our DNA, just etches it. But it's a defense to avoid something where we either had negative reactions with something in the past or negative reactions with a creature that closely resembled humans or creatures, and our ancestors learned how to fight them or avoid them for their own survival. And so the main question is, did our ancestors encounter something that created this response? So was there skinwalkers that were resembling humans? Were there shapeshifters, golems, stuff like that have been told about in folklore and religion and passed down through these stories for centuries, since the beginning of time? Were those things real? And is that why we have this response? It's interesting. It's so interesting. Oh, and I made a list of just some human-like cryptids that I could think of. I'm sure so many more. I'm obviously in a Western culture. I'm in the United States, so I don't know a ton about other cultures, but these are just the ones that I know of offhand. So there's so many from around the world that have been around since before these cultures were able to communicate, which indicates that there possibly was a humanoid figure that people were afraid of, or they just played into that biological uncanny response and created these monsters. I don't know. What do you think? But some of them, just the quick ones that I've remembered: skinwalkers, any sort of fey creatures, demons. Think in the sense of possession, possessing a human. When demons are possessing humans, it makes them the human a little off. There's something a little bit off about them. Golems, ghosts. People don't really talk much about the ghost side of this. Ghosts, when you think about it, they're human, but not quite. There's something off about them. There's something a little bit off. So let alone being afraid of the ghost, there's something a little bit different. Centaurs, their upper half is human-like. Gnomes, mermaids, the Sphinx, brownies, vampires, nymphs, the Jinn. There's so many lists out there. Yeah, I could go on. Human-like creatures are what fuel our nightmares and our ancestors' nightmares. And I want to know what you guys think. Is this a natural phenomenon that stories were built off of, or is it something that our ancestors encountered and then just created this fear in us over it, and now we're just experiencing it way more with the change in evolution of technology. So yeah, that's everything. I will cut this off. I'm trying to keep my videos less than 20 minutes lately for you guys. So if you guys liked this, please give it a thumbs up. If you guys have any additional information, please leave it down below. And I can't tell you how many times I say fascinating. This concept is so fascinating to me. So I hope you guys have a good one and you're staying safe out there, and stay spooky. Bye.